So what now, cowboy? You think I need to find someone to tame me?
No. I think you deserve someone who won't run from the fire inside you.
Not that wild.
They're just too boring.
Canyon Creek, 1878. They called her too wild to Wednesday until a rich cowboy took her on the ride of a lifetime. Dust. It was the first and only thing you felt. It wasn't just dust, but a living creature, a rust-colored cloud born from hundreds of pounding hooves and the shouts of the crowd. It clung to your throat, your eyes, and coated every plank of wood on the buildings along Main Street. The August sun blazed, turning every grain of sand into a hot coal, yet the crowd still jostled, desperate to see something out of the ordinary. Every eye, all of them, was fixed on the starting line, where 7 horses burned with tension. 6 of them were ridden by men with arrogant confidence. The 7th horse, a wild clay-colored Mustang, showed no sign of being tamed and was ridden by Lena Cole. Lena paid no mind to the stares. She wasn't bothered by the whispers, the murmured stories about the wild girl, the feral horse, and she's sure to lose. She only felt the strong beat under her saddle, the coiled tension of muscles under the hide, and the horse's hot breath radiating through her legs. Lena leaned into her Mustang's neck, whispering words of encouragement that only the 2 of them understood. She lifted her head, her sun-gold hair neatly braided into a long plait, her eyes a deep, icy blue, looking straight ahead. Her rival, Colton Wells, the mayor's son, rode a pristine white horse, his chest puffed out with smugness. He looked at Lena with contempt, as if she were a small, insignificant obstacle. The gunshot exploded. A sudden burst of energy. The horses shot forward like lightning, hooves pounding the ground with a thunderous roar. Dust flew up, forming a dense wall. Lena ducked low, becoming one with her Mustang, feeling the scorching wind whip across her face. The 6 men surged ahead, trying to gain distance. Lena wasn't in a hurry. She held a steady, patient pace and waited. She knew her horse. She understood it better than anyone else. When Colton Wells began to falter on the first turn, Lena lunged forward like a whirlwind. She flew past Colton, her dust clinging to his face like a taunt. She heard Colton's angry groan behind her, but she didn't look back. She focused only on what was ahead, on the feeling of freedom she got from riding. When she crossed the finish line, the clear blue sky was like a welcome home. Lena pulled on the reins, the horse's panting breath mingling with her own. She closed her eyes, feeling the sweet victory spread through her body. When she opened them, Colton was standing in front of her. He no longer had his smug look, but instead a face distorted with rage. "You wild horse," he growled, "only animals ride other animals. No one would ever want to marry a girl like you, Lena Cole." Lena cracked a half smile. "Lucky for me, Colton," she said, her voice full of defiance. "I'm not looking for a man to marry. I'm looking for a partner. And clearly, that's not you." The crowd fell silent, the air growing heavy. In the distance, a stranger leaned against a telegraph pole, a wide-brimmed cowboy hat shading part of his face. Ethan Stone said nothing, but his eyes swept over Lena, with no judgment, only a deep curiosity. It was late afternoon, and the pale golden light filtered through the gaps in the stable, creating shimmering golden rays in the dim space. The air was thick with the scent of hay, old leather, and the distinct smell of horses. A man, Ethan Stone, was meticulously inspecting a saddle. He wasn't in a rush. His hands, though strong, were also skilled, moving slowly, as if he were having a conversation with the leather. He had just arrived in Canyon Creek, but he didn't bring with him the clamor of a newcomer. He brought quiet. "You didn't like the race?" Will, the quiet postmaster, asked. He was sitting on a pile of hay, weaving a small basket. Ethan didn't turn around. He continued to stroke the saddle, feeling every tear and crease. "The race?" he asked, his voice low and even. "The mayor's race. His son lost," Will said. He looked at Ethan with knowing eyes. He didn't like it. He called that girl a wild horse. Ethan finally turned back. He nodded slowly. "She's not like other women." Will smiled. That's a good thing, isn't it? Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked out the stable door, where the sun was slowly disappearing, leaving a brilliant orange color in the sky. He thought about Lena Cole, about her fiery eyes and her defiant smile. She wasn't a flower in a vase, she was a storm in a desert, and that, for Ethan, was truly captivating. "I'm looking for a saddle," Ethan said. "One that's not too new, but not too old. One that's ridden a wild horse before." Will looked at him. "You seem different, my friend," he said. Ethan nodded. Maybe so. He knew he wasn't looking for a safe life in Canyon Creek. He was looking for a place to put down roots, a place where the wildness of this land could harmonize with his own stillness. And in that moment, he knew he had found a piece of it. The cicadas chirped incessantly, creating a monotonous but familiar symphony. The air was so still you could hear a grain of sand fall to the ground. Lena Cole sat in the shade of an old willow tree, skillfully mending a worn-out rein. She loved this solitude. It wasn't loneliness, it was freedom. She didn't have to deal with the town's judgmental stares or whispers. Here, it was just her and her Mustang, a simple and genuine existence. Lena was focused on her work when a shadow fell over her. She looked up, and a hand was extended in front of her. In that hand, there wasn't a flower or a hair clip, but a brand new, exquisitely handcrafted bridle. It wasn't ornately decorated, but every stitch was done with care and precision, as if the person who made it had put their whole soul into it. "This is," Lena said, her voice full of suspicion. "A gift," Ethan Stone said, his voice warm. "I made it for a wild horse." Lena's eyebrows raised. She didn't accept kindness from others easily. "I don't need anyone's charity." Ethan said nothing. He just sat down next to her, not trying to take back the gift, nor trying to convince her. He left it there, between the two of them, like a choice. "I think it'll suit your horse," he said after a moment. "It's more durable, and it's designed to withstand adventures. It was made for a noble horse, a horse that needs to be free." Lena looked at the bridle, then into Ethan's eyes. Those eyes held no judgment, no pity, only understanding. He didn't call her wild, wayward, or strange. He just said she was like a noble horse, a creature that needed freedom. "Why?" Lena asked. "Why would you do this?" "Because," Ethan said, "some horses aren't born to be tamed. Some horses are born to be ridden free, and some horses are born to choose for themselves." He looked at her, and his eyes said more than any words ever could. "I wanted to have a new life on your Mustang's back." Something suddenly flared up inside Lena. Not anger or suspicion, but a warm, strange, and profound feeling. She had been called an animal, but never a noble horse. She had been restrained, but never given a choice. She slowly reached out and touched the bridle. The feeling of the soft but sturdy leather was the same as when she touched her horse. She felt understood. "Thank you," she said, her voice almost a whisper. And in that moment, she knew this wasn't just a bridle. This was a gift of acceptance. The clang of the door, breaking the stuffy atmosphere of the general store. The smell of butter, tobacco, and a hint of old mold had seeped into every wall. Mrs. Gable, a skinny woman with eyes as sharp as knives, was arranging cans of beans, but her ears were always perked up for gossip. When Colton Wells walked in, Mrs. Gable offered a social smile. "Hello, Colton. What's wrong? Still upset about the race?" Colton grunted. "She cheated. That wild horse couldn't be faster than mine." "Oh, of course," Mrs. Gable said, but her tone was full of mockery. "Who knows what she did?" "That doesn't matter," Colton said. "What matters is that I saw her. She was talking to a stranger down by the creek." Mrs. Gable stopped arranging the cans, her eyes wide. "A stranger? A man?" "He gave her a gift," Colton said, his voice full of disgust. "A bridle. It must be for something." Mrs. Gable shook her head. "What a disgrace. A girl with no reputation, not a penny to her name, now she's with a stranger." She leaned in and whispered, "His father won't like that." "His father?" Colton asked. "Ah, he's Ethan Stone," Mrs. Gable said. "A man from a wealthy family in the East. He came here he said, to find a new life. It's clear he's looking for a certain kind of wild woman." She laughed, a malicious laugh. Colton gritted his teeth. He wasn't just angry about losing the race, but also about the attention Lena was getting. He felt challenged. "I'll talk to him," he said, his voice cold. "I'll let him know Canyon Creek doesn't welcome people like that." Sunset had fallen, painting the hills in a fiery red. Everything became strangely quiet. Lena was brushing her Mustang's coat, feeling a sense of peace after a long day. She stroked the mane, feeling its softness. Her horse snorted, as if it were talking to her. Suddenly, a strange smell spread through the air. A pungent smell, the smell of smoke. Lena lifted her head, her nose twitching. Fire. She ran out of the stable, and what she saw made her heart stop. A corner of her stable was on fire. The flames licked the old wooden walls, creating a scary crackling sound. Her Mustang was in a panic, neighing in fear, trying to get out of the stable. Lena rushed in, not thinking about the danger. She knew what she had to do. She had to save her horse. She tried to unfasten the reins, but her horse was too panicked. "Calm down," she whispered. "Calm down, my love." But her horse couldn't hear her. "Lena." A voice rang out, a warm and familiar voice. Ethan Stone rushed in, without a moment of hesitation. He said nothing, just grabbed the horse. With a surprising calmness, he spoke in a firm tone. "Look at me," he said. The horse, drawn in by his calmness, turned its head. Ethan gently stroked it, his voice full of reassurance. Lena had managed to unfasten the reins. She grabbed the horse, and with Ethan, they led it out of the stable. When they got outside, the fire had spread to almost the entire stable. Ethan stared at the burning flames, his eyes full of anger. He turned to Lena, and worry was clear in his eyes. "What happened?" Ethan asked. "I don't know," Lena said, her voice trembling. She knew it wasn't an accident. A shiver ran down her spine. It wasn't an accident. In the distance, on a small hill, a shadow stood there, looking at the fire. Colton Wells stood there, with a triumphant smile. Ethan looked at Lena, and he understood. He took her hand, a simple but powerful act. In that moment, between the chaos and danger, between the smoke and fire, Lena felt something extraordinary. She felt protected. She felt chosen. The air after the fire was strangely cold. The smell of smoke and burnt wood still lingered, but it was no longer a roaring fire but a quiet reminder. Lena sat on a burnt log, staring at the ashes, her face smeared with soot. She hadn't cried. She didn't cry. Tears weren't the way she showed her emotions. But inside, something had cracked. The fear had turned into a block of ice, a cold truth. No one in Canyon Creek wanted her there. Ethan sat down next to her, not saying a word. He didn't try to comfort her with empty phrases. He just sat there, his presence a silent affirmation. He offered her a bottle of water. Lena took it, her hand shaking. She took a sip, feeling the cool liquid soothe her dry throat. After a moment of silence, she spoke, her voice hoarse. "You don't have to be here." "I know," Ethan said. "People will say terrible things about you. They'll say you're a fool for helping someone like me." "They say a lot of things," Ethan said, his eyes still on the dying fire. "But they're not me." Lena turned to look at him. She wanted to tell him to go away, that she wasn't worth the trouble. But the words wouldn't come out. Instead, she just nodded slowly, a silent thank you. She felt a strange, warm feeling. It was trust. A small seed had just been planted in her soul, a seed protected by Ethan's quiet understanding. The sun had set. The sky had been replaced by a gray color of dark clouds. The wind began to howl, carrying the moisture of an approaching storm. Lena and Ethan were on their way back, trying to get through the trails. The first drops of rain fell, small and cold, then quickly turned into a violent storm. They hurried to find shelter and found an old willow tree, with its branches hanging down like a natural roof. In the cramped and wet space, the pouring rain created a strange intimacy. Ethan took out a bottle of liquor from his pocket and offered it to Lena. She took it, its warmth spreading through her body. "My father," Lena began, her voice a whisper. "He used to lock me in the wine cellar when I was a child. when I disgraced him. He said I was an unruly horse that needed to be tamed. Ethan looked at her, his eyes full of understanding. He told her about his past, about the gentle, demure girl he once thought he loved. She was like a golden cage, Ethan said. Very beautiful, but it was still a cage. He looked into Lena's eyes. I don't want to tame you. I can't tame you. People say I'm too wild, Lena said, a hint of pain in her voice. Ethan shook his head. You're not too wild, he said. They're just too boring. They're afraid of what they can't control. He reached out and gently touched her face, wiping away a raindrop. A storm isn't something to be tamed. It's something to be admired. Just like you. Ethan's words hit Lena's heart like a lightning bolt striking dry ground. She felt a strong wall inside her crumble. She didn't cry, but something had cracked, like a layer of dry earth finally meeting rain. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray. Lena and Ethan walked on the muddy trail, their boots making squishing sounds. Lena walked ahead, her back straight, not once looking back at Ethan. She still felt his presence, but she didn't want to acknowledge it. She had let Ethan see a part of herself, and now she felt the need to retreat to protect herself. Are you still angry with me? Ethan asked, his voice low, but not accusatory. Lena stopped, not turning around. She looked ahead, where the hills were slowly disappearing into the mist. I'm not angry, she said. I'm just protecting myself. Ethan walked closer, close enough for her to feel the warmth from his body. I don't intend to hurt you, he said. I never have. Lena finally turned around, her eyes full of turmoil. You don't understand, she said, her voice trembling. You don't understand what it's like to have everyone think you're a wild horse that needs to be tamed. You don't understand what it's like to have to fight every day just to breathe. I've lived like that my whole life, Ethan, and I can't trust anyone. Ethan looked into her eyes, and he saw the pain. He saw a strong wall that she had built to protect her heart. He reached out, gently touching her shoulder. I don't want to tame you, Lena, he said. I just want to stand by you. I want to show you that not everyone is like that. Lena looked at his hand. A strange warmth spread from her shoulder. It was a feeling she had never felt before, a feeling of safety, and in that moment she knew this was not a trap. This was a choice. She slowly turned back, facing him. She said nothing, but her eyes said it all. A few days later, the whispers had turned into open gossip. Lena and Ethan walked into the post office, and a sudden silence fell over the room. The ticking of the wall clock echoed like a heavy song. Everyone stared at them, their eyes like sharp knives. Ethan stood next to Lena, his presence like a shield. Didn't you hear what they're saying? Lena whispered, feeling the discomfort rise. I hear it, Ethan replied, his voice calm. But I don't care. Will, the postmaster, was the only one who broke the silence. He handed them their mail, giving a warm smile. Good, he said, as if answering an unasked question. Good what? Lena asked. I'm glad he's here, Will said, looking at Ethan. This town needs a little something different. A little more trouble is more like it, an old woman said bitterly. Ethan just smiled. He took Lena's hand, not in a romantic way, but in a public act, challenging the judgmental stares. That action spoke a clear truth. He had chosen her, and that choice couldn't be shaken by any gossip. The saloon was crowded and noisy. Laughter, clinking glasses, and the smell of old beer mingled together. Ethan was sitting alone in a corner, sipping his whiskey. The door opened, and Colton Wells walked in, with a group of his friends behind him. He went straight to Ethan's table, his eyes narrowed with rage. Who do you think you are? Colton growled, standing across from Ethan. Playing with my things? She's not your thing, Ethan said, his voice low and cold. Colton laughed loudly, a laugh full of arrogance. She's a wild horse, something no one wants. Leave her alone, and you won't get into trouble. Ethan slowly and deliberately set his glass down. I'm not looking for your permission, Colton. Colton reached out and grabbed Ethan's collar. This is Canyon Creek, and we don't like strangers playing with our women. Ethan looked straight into Colton's eyes, his own eyes sharp as ice. She's not your woman. She's a woman, and I've chosen her. Ethan didn't resort to violence. He simply refused to be intimidated. He removed Colton's hand from his collar, A simple but powerful act. Now, leave her alone. Colton was stunned. He was used to people being afraid of him, but Ethan wasn't just. He looked into Ethan's eyes and saw something colder than any fire. Resolve. He backed away, angry but also afraid. The next morning, Ethan sat in his small boarding house room, the sunlight streaming through the window, revealing motes of dust floating in the air. He opened a letter from the east. The handwriting on the envelope was his father's, Nathan Stone. The contents of the letter were simple, but carried a great weight. Nathan spoke of family expectations, of Ethan's disrespect for choosing to stay in Canyon Creek, but most importantly, he had heard the rumors about a wild girl. He warned Ethan that if he continued down this path, he would lose everything. Ethan folded the letter carefully. He looked out the window, where the endless hills stretched out. He had run away from his old life, from expectations, from golden cages. He had come here to find freedom. And he had found it, not in solitude, but in the eyes of a woman. He didn't want to lose his family, but he knew he couldn't go back. He had chosen his path, and that path led to Lena. Ethan read and reread his father's letter, feeling its weight. But he knew he couldn't let that letter decide his life. He took a blank sheet of paper, a pen, and began to write a reply. He wrote about his life in Canyon Creek, about the wildness of this land, about the freedom he had found. He wrote about Lena, not as a wild woman, but as a strong, resilient woman. He wrote that he had found a genuine love, a love that was not a golden cage, but a love built on respect and freedom. "I will not come back, Father," he wrote. "I cannot come back. I have found a new life, a life that I truly want to live." He folded the letter, sealed it, and gave it to Will. "Send this letter to New York," he said. "And if my father sends a reply, don't give it to me. Give it to Lena." Will nodded, understanding the meaning of that action. "I understand," he said. "You're giving her a choice." Sunset fell again, and a gentle wind rustled through the tall grass. Lena stood outside her new stable, a small wooden building that Ethan had helped her build. The fire had turned into a pile of ashes, but Colton's words still echoed in her ears. The fear had returned. When Ethan walked up to her, she was ready. "You should go," she said, her voice cold. "I don't want you to go through all this trouble because of me." Ethan looked into her eyes. "Lena, I'm not doing this for trouble. I'm doing this for you." "You don't understand," Lena said, her voice trembling. "They will never accept me. They will never accept us. Your father, he will take everything away from you." "I don't need those things," Ethan said. "I have enough." Lena shook her head. "You can't say that. You can't give up everything for someone like me." A tear rolled down her cheek, a rare thing for her. "I am a fire. I will burn everything you touch. I will hurt you." Ethan reached out and gently wiped away the tear. "I'm not afraid of fire," he said, his voice warm, "and I'm not afraid of you." He took her hand, feeling her trembling. "I'm not saying this will be easy, but you're not a burden, Lena. You are my choice." Lena couldn't say anything. She just stood there, feeling the warmth of his hand, a warmth she had longed for a long time. Lena decided to visit her mother, a rare and tense trip. Her childhood home was the same as ever, filled with old things and a suffocating silence. Her mother, Ilara, was sitting in a rocking chair, her eyes looking out the window, where there was an old willow tree. She no longer had her wildness, her freedom. She had been tamed. "What are you doing here?" Ilara asked, her voice small and weak. "I just wanted to visit you," Lena said. Ilara nodded slowly. "You're talking to a man," she said, her voice not a question. "I heard about him. His father is a wealthy man." Lena looked at her mother. "Don't you like him?" "You don't understand," Ilara said, her eyes full of sadness. "He will want to tame you. He will want you to become a normal woman, and you will let him, just like me. I used to be a wild horse, but now I'm just an old horse, locked in a stable." Lena clenched her hands. She looked at her mother and saw her own fear. She was afraid of becoming her mother, a woman who had lost all her wildness. "Don't let him do it," Ilara said, her voice trembling. "Don't let him steal your freedom. You were not born to be tame. Lena stood up, not saying a word. She kissed her mother's cheek, a kiss of separation and understanding. She knew her mother was right, but she also knew she wasn't like her mother. She wouldn't let anyone steal her freedom. She would fight for it. After leaving her mother's house, Lena felt a turmoil inside. Her mother's words had touched a deep fear in her. She was afraid that Ethan would be like her father, a man who would try to tame her. But she also knew that Ethan was different. A moment later, a small carriage stopped in front of Lena's house. The driver was a stranger, dressed very politely, with a serious expression. He got out of the carriage and handed Lena a letter. "This is a letter from Mr. Nathan Stone," he said, his voice cold. "He wants to talk to Mr. Ethan Stone." Lena took the letter, feeling its weight. She looked at the man. "He's not here anymore," she said, her voice full of defiance. "He's gone." The man looked at her, his eyes full of contempt. "Are you the wild girl he mentioned?" he asked. Lena didn't answer. She just looked straight at him, her eyes blazing. The man looked into her eyes, and he understood. He wasn't a man to be easily scared, but he also wasn't a man who wanted to confront a woman like this. "I'll tell him," he said, and then he turned around, got into the carriage, and drove away. Lena stood there, watching the carriage slowly disappear. She knew this was not a victory. This was just a small battle. But she also knew she had won. She had protected Ethan, and in that moment she knew she had chosen Ethan. The market was always noisy and bustling, but today a strange crowd had gathered. The smell of grilled meat, fresh vegetables, and sweat mingled together, but no one cared. All eyes were on Lena, who was standing in the middle of the market, talking to a farmer about selling horses. She felt the tension in the air, but she remained calm. Then, heavy footsteps rang out. Colton Wells and a group of his friends pushed into the crowd, creating an empty space. He went straight to Lena, with a sneer full of disgust. "Hello, beautiful," Colton said, his voice full of mockery. "Long time no see. I heard you're trying to sell horses. But who would buy a wild girl's horse?" Lena looked straight into his eyes. "My horse is better trained than you," she said, her voice cold and sharp. Colton laughed loudly, but his eyes were full of anger. "I think you need a lesson," he said, and then, in a sudden motion, he raised his hand and slapped her. A loud slap echoed through the market, and silence fell. Everyone stood still, shocked. A red mark appeared on Lena's cheek, but she didn't flinch. Her eyes blazed, not with pain, but with fury. Before Colton could say another word, a hand grabbed his collar. Ethan stood there, his face cold as ice. He didn't growl, he didn't yell. He just said in a low and powerful voice, "Let her go." "Who do you think you are?" Colton growled. "I am a man," Ethan said, "and I will not let any man lay a hand on her." He looked at the crowd, his eyes full of resolve. "I'm going to marry her," he said. "I'm going to marry Lena Cole, not because she needs me, but because I need her. And she is worth more than anyone in this town could ever admit." A small murmur rose from the crowd. Everyone looked at each other, unable to believe what they had just heard. Colton let go of Ethan. He stared at him, then at Lena, and he understood. This wasn't a joke. This was real. After Ethan spoke, silence once again fell over the market. He was still looking at Lena, and in his eyes she saw a raw truth. She saw love, not the love of a man who wanted to possess her, but the love of a man who wanted to stand by her. "You don't have to answer right now," Ethan said, his voice low, just loud enough for the two of them to hear. But Lena knew. She looked at Colton's face, at his anger, and she knew Colton would never understand. He would never understand that she wasn't an object to be possessed. She was a wild horse, and she would never be tamed. She turned to Ethan, her eyes full of determination. "I don't need to think," she said. "I've thought too much already." She reached out and took his hand. "I accept." A whisper of a cheer went up in the market. People couldn't believe what they had just heard. A girl who had rejected everyone in Canyon Creek had accepted a stranger. Lena and Ethan stood there, hand in hand, facing the judgment of the whole town. And in that moment, they weren't two lonely people anymore. They were one. After the crowd had dispersed, Lena and Ethan went to an old farm, a large piece of land that belonged to Ethan's father, which he had rejected. The old house was run down and abandoned, but it had a wild beauty, just like Lena. "You're going to live here?" Lena asked, her voice full of curiosity. "We're going to live here," Ethan said. "We're going to rebuild it. We're going to make it ours." He looked at her, and his eyes were full of hope. "I want you to train horses. I want you to do everything you love. I want you to be free." Lena looked at the house, at the hills surrounding it. She could see a future here, a future not bothered by judgmental stares, a future not hurt by gossip. "We'll do it," she said, and she knew it was true. It was a wedding with no fuss, no grandeur. There was no crowd, no formal ceremony. It was just Lena in a simple, white wedding dress, and Ethan in an old suit. They stood under an old willow tree, where they had once sheltered from the rain. And Will, the postmaster, was the only witness. "I don't have a speech," Will said, his voice warm. "I just have one word. I see you too, and I see something beautiful. A choice, not a possession. I wish you well." Lena and Ethan looked at each other, their eyes full of sincerity. Lena had once thought that marriage was a cage, but now she understood that it was just a choice to stand together, to face the world. "I never thought I'd do this," Lena said, her voice full of emotion. "Me neither," Ethan said, "but I couldn't be happier." Ethan reached out and gently stroked Lena's hair. He kissed her, a kiss of freedom, of acceptance, of love. And in that moment, she knew she had found a man who didn't want to tame her, but wanted to ride with her. After the wedding, Lena and Ethan went back to their farm. The rain had stopped, the sky was blue again, and the air was strangely fresh. The old house was run down and dilapidated, but they looked at it with eyes full of hope. They didn't need a new house, they needed a house of their own. They started to rebuild it, one step at a time. Lena used her skills to fix the rotten walls and repair the stable. Ethan used his skills to garden, planting vegetables and fruit trees. They didn't talk much, but their silence was full of understanding. They didn't need to say they loved each other. They showed it through every action. One morning, Will, the postmaster, came to visit them. He didn't bring mail, but a gift, a few willow tree seeds. "A friend of mine gave them to me," he said. "I thought they would suit you." Lena looked at the seeds. She knew. They weren't just seeds. They were a blessing, a wish for freedom and acceptance. She felt a warm feeling, a feeling she had never felt before. She had found a family. Years later, Lena and Ethan's farm was a place full of life. The old house had become a cozy home, with white painted walls and a lush green garden. Lena's stable had also been rebuilt, and her horses had become stronger and wilder. Lena was still Lena. She still rode her Mustang, still a wild and free woman. But now, she wasn't alone anymore. She had a husband, Ethan, a man who never tried to tame her, but just stood by her side. One morning, Ethan stood by the window, watching Lena ride her horse. She rode her horse, her long hair flying in the wind. He looked at her, and he understood. He had once thought he would marry a gentle, demure woman, but he had married a storm, and he couldn't be happier. "You were never tamed," he said, his voice full of admiration. "You never tried," Lena said, her voice full of love. "You gave me freedom." They didn't have children, but they had a family of horses, of outcasts, of people who didn't belong anywhere. And they had built a new community, a community built on acceptance and freedom. Their story wasn't a story about a woman being tame. It was a story about a woman who had found a man willing to ride with her, accepting every part of who she was. It was a story about a love that was chosen, not possessed. Love is often described as an emotional storm, a fierce fire that burns everything in its path. But a great love, a love strong enough to endure through every storm, is not about possession, it's about choice. It's when two individuals, two separate and free beings, decide to stand together not because they need someone to fill a void, but because they want to share their lives. Life, much like love, is not a fairy tale with a happily ever after ending. Life is a path of rough roads, unexpected challenges, and difficult choices. We often tend to seek a safe harbor, a place to hide from the waves. However, true maturity comes when we realize that happiness isn't found in a hiding place, but in finding someone who is willing to ride the waves with us. True love does not try to tame or change a person. It accepts their wildness, their differences, and even their brokenness. Like a storm and a desert, you might think they cannot coexist. But when the storm brings rain, it doesn't try to turn the desert into a forest. It simply nurtures the seeds that have long been dormant, helping them sprout and grow in their own way. That is love, not change, but nurture. One of the biggest mistakes we often make in love is trying to fit the person we love into an ideal mold. You have to be this way. You should do that. Love is not a golden cage. No matter how beautiful it may be, it is still a cage. A genuine love is a pair of wings, giving each other the freedom to soar, to explore, and to become the best versions of yourselves. Trust isn't about monitoring each other, but about knowing that no matter where you fly, you will return. The life of a strong woman isn't about finding a man to lean on, but about finding a man who is willing to stand beside her and fight with her. She doesn't need to be saved, because she is capable of saving herself. What she needs is a companion, someone who understands that love is not a bond, but a powerful choice, made every single day. And in everyone's story, love doesn't always begin with flowery words or romantic gestures. Sometimes it begins with a gentle touch full of understanding, a safe embrace in the middle of a storm. It begins with an unwavering decision, a courageous declaration that I choose you. Love and life are intertwined in this way. We cannot separate them. Life teaches us how to love, and love gives meaning to life. When we learn to love someone without trying to change them, we also learn to love ourselves. And that is the most important lesson, a lesson about acceptance, about freedom, and about the courage to live our own lives with a person whom we have chosen.